しき花よ、今一つとなりてその花弁の奥の地獄から新たな脅威を生み出せ。融合召喚、現れろ。飢えた牙も毒竜レベル8スターブベノムフュージョンドラゴン。
Alright, hey everyone, Sev here. Today I'm here to go over my Predaplant branded Predaplant deck profile for this current format. This deck is still pretty functional even without Predaplant Verte Anaconda, but I'll explain more of that when we get into the extra deck. But for now, let's get into the main deck. Starting with the monsters, we're starting with our Predaplant package. We have 3 copies of Orphis Scorpio. This is the main monster you'll want to see. If this card is no more special summon, you can send 1 monster from your hand to the graveyard, and then special summon 1 Predaplant monster from your deck. And then basically you use this as one of your ways to get to Darling Queen of Cobra, which allows you to get into all of your fusion plays. Next, 3 copies of Dippolis. If you want to, you can maybe cut this down to 2, but I wouldn't recommend cutting it down to any lower than 2 because this is kind of your part of what makes your deck consistent. You have many ways to send this card for its effect. You can use it with Branded Fusion, you can send it off Orphis Scorpio, you can send it off of Rebellion, and of course if you want to run Foolish Burial, you can always send it off of Foolish Burial. So I mean, you can easily play so many ways to essentially get the Roto for the archetype. Next is 3 copies of Predaplant Buffalicula. This is essentially just a substitution for polymerization when it's in the scales, and it can recur back your other pendulum monsters, your other Predaplant pendulum monsters, as long as they're face up in the extra deck when used for a fusion summon. And then next is 2 copies of Predaplant Triantis. Basically, this helps you, this makes it to where when you're scaling it, it allows you to fuse with other monsters in your scales. And then its monster effect allows you to essentially just distribute predator counters equal to the amount of monsters you control. So this facilitates the archetype's gimmick of predator counters basically just being a thing. And with Dragostapelia, you can essentially just negate 2 to 3 monsters at a time. For the one of Predaplants, we have 1 copy of Predaplant Clamido Sundew, and then 1 copy of Darling Queen of Cobra, and then 1 copy of Saracenia. So, all of these Predaplants all have good uses. Like Clamido Sundew is, again, a poly substitute. Cobra essentially searches any of your fusion spells that are normal spells, and then Saracenia essentially can search any Predap card in the entire archetype to your hand when either destroyed by battle or sent from the field to the graveyard by a card effect. And then that's enough for the Predaplant monsters. Onto the Predap spells. 3 copies of Predap Practice. I've seen one build only run 1 of this, but it also runs things like Alibur and really other Despia stuff. In my opinion, like you're just making your deck way less consistent if you're not running 3 copies of this. It's not only Ash bait, but also allows you to potentially go into your combo without using your normal summon. So it opens you up to bigger options in your combo line later down the line, which can allow you to essentially get to more interruptions. 1 copy of Predaprime Fusion. This is multi-purpose now, with a good fusion that you can go into using only 2 Predaplant monsters. You can use this to dodge infinite impermanence or effect veiler, or you can use it on your opponent's turn in order to create more interruption for you. You can make a Dragostapelia, or you can make a Starving Venom Predapower Fusion Dragon. Then the last of the Predap cards, 1 Predap Planning. This serves multiple purposes. This serves as an in-archetype Foolish Burial, but also it distributes Predator counters, and it can also pop a card when you fusion summon on the crackback. So again, this card is pretty useful, but you can easily search it in this deck because you do a lot of searching in this deck. Next is to the branded stuff. We have 1 copy of Fallen of Albaz, 1 Stay Sailor Romaran, and then 3 copies of Branded Fusion, and then 1 Branded Banishment. Banishment is pretty good as it can also create interruption during your opponent's turn. Branded Fusion is obviously the card that you'll want to see in every single opening hand, or at least a way to get to it. Romarin is again another foolish burial for a plant monster, so you can just start foolishing cards really. And then Fallen Valvaz is honestly just kind of it's like Red Eyes Dragon, or Red Eyes Black Dragon, or Dark Magician for Dragoon. Basically, you kind of need to run this in order to run the entire package. But it ultimately works out because Fallen Valvaz is really useful, and also Branded Fusion is a hell of a card. And then on to more consistency stuff. We have the Fright first. We have the 2 Chain, 3 Patchwork, and then I'm running two copies of Polymerization. Obviously, this is extremely standard for most Despia builds, but if you really wanted to, you could probably play around with these ratios. You could probably run like 2 Patchwork, 1 Poly, and then 2 Chain. But obviously, you want to run like a matching amount. But honestly, we run Patchwork at 3 to see it the most. Basically, we use it to search Chain and Poly is a combo play, and Chain is discard fodder after we use its effect to get Patchwork. And that is all the Fright first stuff. A little consistency booster, I guess. It just helps your deck become just that more consistent, with it being essentially just a way for you to just keep generating consistency and generating advantage on your opening turn, and it's extremely effective too. Next to our DPE package, we're playing 1 Destiny Hero Plasma and 1 Celestial, and then 2 copies of Fusion Destiny. Why I'm playing Plasma is I want to flex the fact that this is a super rare copy from Legendary Collection GX. But really, if you wanted to, you'd play Dasher. Dasher is infinitely better because it allows you to special summon a monster that you draw in your draw phase. And Celestial has been standard ever since DPE was released back in Burst of Destiny. Then 2 copies of Fusion Destiny because it's still a very good card. You open this and then you can end on like a DPE. Even a DPE by itself, depending on the deck, can be absolutely devastating. Next is on to our kind of non-generic / power fusion / just our defensive cards. We're playing 3 copies of Super Polymerization. This is a deck that can play Super Poly really well and really benefit off of it. Super Poly, it works really well against decks that are mainly dark attribute, but if you want to, you can play other Super Poly targets that could affect decks that are like Salamangreat. Like you could play Diplex or Chimera if you really wanted to, but Super Polymerization is honestly just a pretty neat way. I've also used it to fusion summon in the battle phase in order to I attack with a ton of damage, and then I super poly up my board into like a Starving Venom, and then it's an additional 28, but if I have enough monsters, I can make a Trivial Veritum, which again is awesome. 1 copy of Instant Fusion. I remember when the ban list was coming, like it was getting time for the ban list, and people were hyping up Instant Fusion, like, oh, it was coming back to 3. To be honest, I wish it came back to 3, but if it came back to 3, like, this deck would easily be tier 1, just from the sole fact of what Instant Fusion does in this deck, which is it summons your new level 5 Predaplant, which is literally everything that the deck could have wanted. It searches a Predap card or a Predaplant monster, and it can summon a Predaplant from deck. I mean, like, it's literally everything you need. But Instant Fusion still is at 1, but still, when you open this card, like, it is a 1-card combo, which is pretty nice. But again, you kind of have to open it, but still. 1 copy of Called by the Grave as like a little defensive card. If you can find room for it, this is a 44 card deck. But if you want to make like a wee bit of room, you can easily fit like a cross-out package fitting like Ash Blossom, Valor, and then like Nibiru. And then you could just, because those are the cards that are like truly impactful against this deck, like, because this deck doesn't produce any spot up negation. With the Therion stuff, it would create spot up negation, but as the current moment, it does not create up any spot up negation. it just creates some interruption. So if you want to do like a crossout package of that, then that would work literally wonders in this deck. But currently, we are very susceptible to Nibiru. Next is 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence as your last sort of defensive card. Impermanence helps disrupt your opponent's first turn, and it can also address board states. And it can also be a part of your end board when you go first. You just set it. And then not only is that a singular monster negation, but it's also an entire column that your opponent has to actually be concerned about. Otherwise, they could end up losing a pretty powerful card. And it's happened multiple times. Despite the fact that it seems so obvious that you'd remember, like, hey, don't use this column. It's happened before. I think it's even happened to me before, but that's fine. On to the Predaplant fusions. We're running 1 Predapower Fusion Dragon. This is essentially a weaker version of Destroy Phoenix Enforcer, because it's actually the spot up negation that the deck really needs, but it's also pretty hard to make. But it's still a very good card, and it can target 1 dark monster in your graveyard and then special summon it, so it can get even your DPE back online, which is pretty nice. 1 Trivial Veritum. This has been the boss monster for a long time, and basically Trivial Veritum can be used very multi-purposable, or multi-purpose, I guess would be like the actual word for it, but basically you can use it for multiple purposes. It could be a part of your end board, which it actually is, and depending on the hand, it can negate extra deck summons, which is pretty powerful. It can revive itself, however you do not get its other effect if you revive itself. And it's also just a big beat stick. I mean, like, it's always nice to have a way to just close out games, and Trivial Veritum can be a way to close out games. Against decks like Dragon Link, which are primarily dark attribute, like, say goodbye to your board. Like, you're just like, your board is now mine. Then 1 copy of Predaplant Chimera Rafflesia. You don't summon this very often, but it is still it comes up. Like, it can search normal fusion spells during the standby phase after it's sent to the graveyard, and it can banish cards, and it can be a pretty nice beater too. Like, I get why it's pretty expensive, and sadly it's only had 1 printing, which is in this beautiful secret rare from Fusion Enforcement. But I ordered my card in Italian, so I will not be able to read it until I understand Italian. Next is 2 copies of Dragos Stapelia. Dragos Stapelia is pretty nice as it creates spot up negation, and it, well, not like spot up, like it can negate current effects, but it can negate monster effects as long as they have predator counters. And this card distributes predator counters, and it's also in a way a super volley target, because it requires 1 fusion monster and 1 dark monster, which with many decks playing DPE now, like, you get one of the requirements no matter what. And then we have the last Predaplant fusion. We have 2 Predaplant Ambulance. I'm not going to attempt to say its actual name because it kind of pisses me off. Basically, it requires any two Predaplant monsters to make, and then you can add 1 Predaplant monster or Predap card from your deck to your hand. Then you can basically tribute itself off and then summon any Predaplant monster from your deck. Again, this is everything the deck like actually needed or wanted, was this card right here. Like, it didn't need, like, Trivial Veritum is nice, like, don't get me wrong, but like, it didn't necessarily need it, I guess. It's nice, but like, it probably needed this a little more than it needed this. Or it needed this more than it needed cards like Hulia and Pharynchus. Konami. Anyway, so those are your Predaplant fusion monsters. You'll easily see 1 or 2 of those each game you play. Now we're getting on to our branded stuff, which is 2 Mirror Jade. This is pretty standard, I guess. Like, it always comes up. Like, if you're going into like a grindier game, you'll need 2 Mirror Jade. And Mirror Jade is an absolute monster. Yesterday I was playing in my locals with this deck, and my round 3 opponent was playing Guru Control. Sure. So game 2, he goes and he sets a card face down. I don't know what it is. And then he sets a back row. flips the back row, it's Gozen match. Okay, Gozen's a little bit annoying in this deck, but you can easily play through it. I end up making Mirror Jade eventually, and then I banish his set monster, which ends up being a Ghost Ogre, which this dude was bricked, and I ended up like OTKing him. No, I ended up putting a ton of damage. Like, I brought him down to like 23, and then the dude tried to search his Fusion Destiny using my Orpha Scorpio, but he ended up siding it out. Then one Alba Lenitus the Abyss Dragon. This is how you can get most of your crackback going. For example, if you don't see Fusion Destiny, you dump this off Mirror Jade. Know what you're seeing? You're seeing your Fusion Destiny. Then you can get your DPE going. You get this deck essentially sort of bridges the gap between you might have game to you can easily get game with, because you can essentially control what you get for your draw. Plus, it's not like you have to give up your draw anyway. One Lubellion and then one Albion. These are basically brothers. Like, you summon this and then you can summon this, or you summon this and then you can summon this. Like, they are pretty much in tandem, but with your main going first combo, you want to summon Albion, and then you'll summon Lubellion, and then you'll shuffle Lubellion back, and then you make the Mirror Jade, and then you'll eventually fuse this off in order to get Branded Banishment. So I mean, essentially this whole package sort of works together, except for Alba Lenitus. You'll never really summon this, but you'll dump it off literally a ton. This is $10, by the way. Man, I just sound like a loser. Anyway, your one Destiny Hero, Destroyer, Phoenix Enforcer. This is a hell of a card. Again, many people were still astonished that a card like this could be printed, but I mean, in my opinion, I think it's pretty cool. Basically, and in fact, not many people really account for is your opponent's monsters lose 200 attack for each hero card in your graveyard. So usually your opponent will be losing like 400 attack on each monster. And then you can destroy basically one card you control and one card your opponent controls, which doesn't target, and there is no cost, meaning your opponent has to address it, or they just end up either A, like losing some cards, or B, they end up creating a bigger problem, which in some decks, like decks that can run Scythe, they create the bigger problem, which is a Scythe. One Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, super poly target, but it also came up where I needed to put damage on board, so I put some monsters in the Starving Venom, and that's exactly what I did. I put a literal crap ton of damage on. One Mud Dragon of the Swamp. I would probably end up cutting this for Guardian Chimera. Like, this card's nice and it can come up, but Guardian Chimera is insane. Like, I've literally had situations come up where Guardian Chimera has turned an entire duel on its head because I've summoned Guardian Chimera and it popped 2 cards. Like, and then that is all for your extra deck. Now onto the side deck. This will be dependent on what you either see at your locals or like what's currently going on in the format, but based on the cards that I had just kind of in my collection sort of laying around, this is sort of what I determined to be the best side deck for the current format. We have 3 Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. This will stop basic adding, so this currently in my local area there's like 4 Sky Striker players, 3 or 4 I think, and like this stops your like you can stop Engage with this, you can stop the Shizuka Search. Like, Ash is nice. One Token Collector. We also have a few Sword Soul players in my local area. I think that might be a misprint right there, but basically Token Collector, it prevents your opponent from creating tokens, which, if you don't know, Sword Soul, basically all their tuner monsters are tokens. They can't synchro summon. You just slap Token Collector down and you're like, well, shit, because they can't do nothing with really anything. One Predaplant Spider Orchid. Now, I was convinced by a current YouTuber that is currently playing Predaplants, and they have this in their side deck, and I thought about it more and more, and I was like, you know what? It can definitely work. It is essentially a searchable MST that you can also recur back with your Buffalicula. Basically, you scale it, and then during your main phase, during the turn the card was scaled, you target one of the face-up card on the field in the spell and trap zone, and then you destroy it. that's pretty good. I mean, like, if you really wanted to, you could probably fit, like, Artifact Dagda and then Scythe. And you could end up Scythe locking your opponent, but it's unlikely that you'd be able to fit it because this deck, early on in its combos, locks you into fusions. Next up is 3 copies of Dark Ruler No More. This is for when we need to go second against, like, Sword Soul or Despia or even DDDs. You know, decks that can make multiple negations. This will just make it to where those negations, or even Dragon Link. You drop this, and then all of a sudden, boom, their Boral and Dragon ain't doing shit because it's negated. And then we're running 3 copies of Cosmic Cyclone because aside from the Spider Orchid, we have no way to out cards like Mystic Mine. Or Skill Drain for that matter, but Skill Drain is a lot less impactful than Mystic Mine. Like, mine just, it hurts, and it pisses me off when people play against it. But it's a good card, I get why people play it. But that's why we play Cosmic Cyclones, to banish mine. Next, to address trap decks like Eldritch and Dynamorphia, because there's a couple, I think there's like 3 Dynamorphia players at my locals yesterday. And I think a couple of them got into mirror matches, or no, it was a Striker and Dynamorphia match, and I was like, God, that sounds horrible. You play the 1 red reboot, basically you slap this down on the table, and then your Dynamorphia player needs the Crisis Center because they're just like, well, I can't activate my purple cards anymore. And it's great. And then this is for your, like depending on your matchup. 3 copies of Dimensional Barrier, currently one of the better trap cards in the format. You play against Despia, you flip Dimensional Barrier, you call Fusion, they get sad. You play Sword Soul, you call Synchro, they get sad. Basically, Dimensional Barrier basically attacks a lot of meta decks right now. Sadly, it was not printed when Link Monsters were a thing, so it does not include Link Monsters. I'm pretty sure if it included Link Monsters, people would have been calling for this card's ban a long time ago. But this is my current side deck. This is what I think is pretty good. A few side deck cards that I'd recommend would be the, I guess, like, if you notice that, like, your local your locals has a ton of players that play the zombie world, like, Beldrock deck, then you could play the, oh my god, the Super Poly zombie, the one that requires 2 zombie monsters, the Dragosidos Nether Soul Dragon, I believe. I can probably get it up on screen soon. I'm done trying to guess its name, but for now, like, if you want to run that in your side deck or even in your extra, you can, but I mean, I guess your side deck really depends on your locals. But I mean, this is kind of like the best Predaplant, sort of budget Predaplant build you can get, because obviously you could include, like, the Therion stuff. And the Therions are very nice, and because they're pretty good, but in my opinion, the Therion stuff, it doesn't give you the same impact as having this does. And I've had a lot more success generally with this deck than the Therion Predaplant deck. A few things to sort of wrap this video up is why am I not playing Lonefire Blossom? One thing I noticed pretty quickly when playing Lonefire Blossom was your opponents get very confused as to why you're playing Lonefire Blossom, so they'll just ash it on effect, and you're just like, well, shit, I just gave up my normal summon for a card that, if it resolved, would be absolutely amazing, but it didn't resolve. Now, obviously, that problem is a little bit less omnipresent because we do have our scales and you can pendulum summon it, but I just thought it was like a pretty dead card, and I actually cut it because I was like, it's not, when you can pendulum summon it, you don't need to pendulum summon it, and when you need to pendulum summon it, you can't pendulum summon it because you don't have your scales. So then you have to normal summon it, and then you risk being completely, like, impermanence, or like your opponent just veiling it or ashing it. So it's just like, It's like, why do I want a card that can only work in a few scenarios in my deck? So I just figured, screw it, cut it. So I did. And currently that experiment is going pretty well, as I'm seeing a decent amount of success on online applications like Dueling Book so far with this deck. But again, I'll need to get like Guardian Chimera, because Guardian Chimera is a hell of a card. But anyway, I hope you all enjoyed my Predaplant deck profile, and I'll see you guys all later.